I always like to start the show sharing a few thoughts about what's been capturing my attention lately. And to be honest, I've been thinking a lot about a man named Joseph Welch. Now, that name may not ring a bell right away, but it will in just a second. Joseph Welch was the Army's chief counsel during the McCarthy hearings in 1954. Most of us have learned about Senator Joseph McCarthy and the Red Scare, that period of intense fear that communists had infiltrated American government and society. Beginning in 1950, McCarthy claimed, regularly without evidence, that communists were embedded in the State Department, the military, and other government institutions. He used accusations, intimidation, and spectacle to fuel public anxiety. Careers were destroyed, reputations were ruined, civil liberties trampled. You know the story. Now, McCarthy's downfall came in 1954 during the nationally televised Army McCarthy hearings, when he accused the U.S. Army itself of having been infiltrated by communists. For the first time, millions of Americans were able to watch his tactics live, his bullying, his recklessness, his cruelty. And that's when Joseph Welch stepped in. In a moment that has echoed through American political history, Welch turned to McCarthy and said, "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" Lady B, can we play that clip? I think that's just such an important one to listen to.
Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Now, that moment marked the beginning of the end for Joseph McCarthy. Public opinion turned sharply against him, and later that year, he was formally censured by the U.S. Senate. McCarthy was a populist demagogue, something we've become all too familiar with lately. And here's a detail that explains a lot of our world today. Joseph McCarthy's lawyer and closest advisor was Roy Cohn. Years later, Roy Cohn would become the lawyer and most trusted advisor to one Donald Trump. So the parallels between the two shouldn't surprise us. Which brings me to the question that I've been turning over in my head of late. Why haven't we had our Joseph Welch moment? Why hasn't somebody stood up clearly and unmistakably and said to the president, "Have you no sense of decency, sir?" Consider what we've witnessed in just the past few weeks alone. Whether it's bullying allies abroad or unleashing deadly violence at home, our political institutions have been weaponized, and cruelty has been normalized. This is not a series of isolated incidents. It's a governing style that treats intimidation as leadership and cruelty as strength. And it goes on and on. And that, I think, is part of the danger, the sheer volume of it all. Each new outrage crowding out the last. Each norm broken so quickly that we barely have time to register before moving on. What once would have stopped the country cold now barely slows the news cycle. That kind of normalization is how democracies erode. Not all at once, but gradually. Not with a single dramatic rupture, but through 1,000 small acts of looking away. Which is why I keep coming back to Joseph Welch. His moment mattered not because it changed policy overnight, but because it drew a moral line. He named what everyone else could see but was afraid to say. He refused to let bullying and cruelty pass as normal. And so it's left me wondering, where are the voices of shame today? Where are the people, particularly on the right, willing to say that this is not who we are supposed to be? That there are lines you do not cross, even if you have the power to do so. So today I want to humbly offer my own Joseph Welch call for decency, not as a partisan attack, but as a moral question. A question that history has asked before and feels as urgent now as it did in 1954. I've titled it, "Have You No Sense of Decency?" And I'm going to read it to you right now. Have you no sense of decency, sir? No sense of the gravity of your words when spoken from the most powerful office in the world? Have you no sense of decency toward our allies? Toward a Europe mocked and bullied? Toward Canada dismissed? Toward Greenland spoken of not as a people, but as a possession? Have you no sense of decency for the rules and norms that have kept global catastrophe at bay, that you sneer at as weakness, but that history knows as restraint? Have you no sense of decency for world opinion, for the damage done when American leadership is replaced by American intimidation? Have you no sense of decency for the weak and the poor around the world, for those who experience American power not as hope, but as fear? Have you no sense of decency for immigrants who pick our crops, cook our meals, build our cities, seeking nothing more than a chance at a better life? They are what decency looks like. Have you no sense of decency at home, as cruelty is mistaken for toughness, as violence is defended as necessary to keep you safe, as human beings are reduced to threats, statistics, or political props? Have you no sense of decency for human dignity itself, for families separated, for communities living in terror, for suffering waved away as the price of politics? Have you no sense of decency for our history, that you would strip classrooms, museums, and public spaces of uncomfortable truths, erase the language of slavery and justice, and pretend that forgetting is the same as healing? Have you no sense of decency for disagreement, for critics, journalists, judges, and citizens who dissent not because they hate this country, but because they love it enough to speak up? Have you no sense of decency for democracy, for the norms that restrain power, for the idea that leadership means something more than domination? At long last, sir, have you no sense of decency, no shame, no sense of restraint, no sense of the difference between power and cruelty? Because this office does not belong to you alone. It belongs to a nation, to its history, and to generations yet not born. And history does not forget. It remembers who mocked the weak, who bullied allies, who treated cruelty as strength and truth as inconvenience. And when this moment is judged, the question will not be how loudly you dominated, but whether you preserved the dignity of the office you held and the people you were elected to serve.